Welcome to Citizens Forum. Today is Wednesday, February 15th, and we're going to have an array of people to be interviewed today. I have with me right now is Stephen Hammond. He's from a group called Mad as Hell Victoria. And we all witnessed the fiasco that happened around the courthouse over the last couple of years. Very hard to understand the intricacies and the nuances in this story because we've been relying on the corporate media for the most part. But we have a person that's played a major role in trying to move this issue along and trying to bring people to an understanding of what all the conditions that were created when we ended up with a bunch of people camping beside the courthouse. So welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thanks, Walter. Good to
Now,
be here.
if you would just give us a brief history of this issue. How did it come about? And basically also, what is the status right now of, you think, of homelessness in Victoria and British Columbia?
Okay, well, stop me at any time.
No worry.
Really, if you go back to December of 2009,
Yeah.
that's when the BC Supreme Court actually said that you can't prevent people in this city from camping overnight unless you have enough facilities for them. And because people just don't disappear. And so that was one of the things I would have thought that the city, the province would have got their act together, formed an immediate subcommittee of some kind and say, okay, how do we make sure that there are in fact enough places for people to be housed in some way? But the idea was that people always had to leave in the morning.
Yeah.
So in the fall of 2015, you had a number of people on the courthouse lawn, right beside the courthouse lawn in downtown Victoria, and they were staying during the day. They weren't moving along. A number of residents, a number of neighbors in the area went to the courthouse and said, you've got to move these people along. And they had a deputy minister and a person who was the director of court services who said, no, we're not going to move them. And one of the things they said is, where are they going to go? Now, this is kind of ironic coming from provincial government senior bureaucrats, since it was the complete lack of care about housing and the housing issues from the provincial government that is causing some of this problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the only reason that we have homeless people, but you know, the rents being sky high, not having affordable housing. This is Christy Clark, this is Rich Coleman, this is them allowing this to go on for years. But anyway, so they said, no, we're going to allow them to stay. The deputy police chief of Victoria, Steve Ng, he had meetings with the senior bureaucrats and said, you don't want to do this. You can't do this. This is a very bad thing, but it was their property, so pretty much they could do what they want. And he even said, and if you are going to do this, then here's some normal protocols that we've learned from tent cities, let's say in the United States and other areas. You'd have a lot of space in between the tents so that it's not a fire risk. You'd have restrictions on entry in and out of it. You'd have a lot of concern about safety outside. You'd have the fences. In other words, you'd have a lot of stuff that would be set up. So they're saying, look, we don't want a tent city, but if you're going to do it, you should be at least doing this. They completely ignored it. So that's why it was the complete schmozzle that was there. That's why there were so many risks for fire. People can go up in flames, and it's happened actually in places where that happens, where you're trying to keep warm in the tents. So this was going on. Everyone was going nuts and asking why they allowed this in the first place. And then when the province tried to get rid of them, a judge actually said no, because where are they going to go? They botched that. The province absolutely botched that injunction. And as a matter of fact, they had the likes of City Councillor Ben Izard, who he and his ex-wife went there to say, oh, well, when these homeless people were near our daughter, we didn't like that. So if they're going to be down here, well, at least it's contained. You know, so keep it out of our property, but you can have it down here. In the meantime, and what happens in these areas is you get this huge, gigantic bubble zone of illegal activity that's going on. So people were harassed, they were intimidated, they were afraid of going out for walks, even during the day, or night with their dogs, for example. People were assaulted. Everything in the neighborhood was stolen. If you didn't have things nailed down, it was stolen and it went into that tent city. And the police knew it, but they were limited on what they were doing or what they were willing to do. As a matter of fact, anyone in the neighborhood, if anything went missing, that's the first place you went, if you were able to get in there and see it. All the nails from the shed in our backyard went to help build some of the facilities in the tent city because they stole that from us. So there was all these things that were going on, and then then eventually it was so bad, and there was a lot of an older woman in a scooter. She was assaulted as someone said, "Get off your scooter! I want it." There was people who were chasing people through the Anglican school, the elementary school yard. Like up to 6 police were chasing this one guy who was just going crazy because of the drugs he was on. This is not a good way of dealing with the community. And so eventually, when the province went back with a lot more resources, with highly paid lawyers that came over from Vancouver at our expense in order to do it. And when the judge ruled, and the judge ruled in July saying, you got to have those people out of there by August 8th, he was doing it as a courtesy to say they were hoping the new facility would be available for housing some of these people, but he was very clear in the decision that he was not basing it on whether there was facilities available. He was saying it is so horrendous in there, around there. Rats were a real big issue. So when I was in the court listening to what was going on between the lawyers, the judge was very concerned about all the rats that were there, and it took them a long time to get rid of it.
Yeah.
So the people left, they went to these other areas. We are still really concerned about the bubble zone of what's going on when you house a lot of people. The most difficult to house, such as Mount Edwards, or you've got the Johnson Street facility, is causing huge problems around there. And it's not because we don't care about homeless people, we do, and we care about the most vulnerable, and we care about people with addictions, but when you just house them all together and give them the minimum, I mean the minimum of support, then we're saying that is a recipe for disaster. So
Okay,
they're
yeah.
remediating the area. It's costing a fortune in order to remediate that. They've destroyed a number of trees, which is just so sad. It was a lovely little park before, and this is where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a story. And the thing is that why do you think, I mean, it happened in the first place in the sense that, was it because the jurisdiction over the courthouse property was a provincial jurisdiction and not the city of Victoria? Is that the issue?
Well, that's actually how the city didn't have the right to go onto that property and say, you got to move along, like they do with all other of the Victoria City properties. So they didn't have the right to do that. But the province could say to the city, you can move these along, or the province can just do it on their own.
Yeah.
But they deliberately allowed it. I got to tell you, I think we will probably solve the problem of what happened to Jimmy Hoffa before we ever figure out why anyone in their right mind would, when they were told by the police, deputy police chief, and everyone else to say, do not do this. It boggles the mind. If you were concerned about homelessness, then you know what? Put them up at the Empress for like a year, and it would be cheaper than the millions and millions of dollars that it costs. Like, it just makes no sense that they immediately had to spend a fortune of our tax dollars in order to try to resolve the situation and get rid of it, and to think that here we are well over a year later and that property is still an absolute disaster.
Well, you know, I thought it was a bit excessive when they took the trees out.
Yeah.
Were the trees actually dead, or what was the story with that?
I don't know. I don't know. We have to rely on botanists and others to have given the proper advice. But it just seems weird that you have to remove all that stuff. And here's something else that's really, I think, very strange about this, is they're saying we want to put in a playground. Well, you've got Lisa Helps who's saying, let's put in a playground. The reasoning that they're saying to put in a playground is so that no one can ever camp there. Here's a thought. No one was able to camp there in the first place. Like, all you do is put up a sign saying no camping, or even if you didn't have signs there, you say, excuse me, this is our property, meaning the people's property. You don't have the right to stay here, during the day. So the fact that they would be spending this extra money or getting someone to donate to put a campground on there, I heard, I wasn't invited, but I heard for the buildings right around there when they were inviting them, that the provincial bureaucrats, through BC Housing or others, actually said, folks, the best thing to do is to put a playground on here, because then no judge could ever do that again. The judge didn't do this. It was the judge who actually had to respond to it, but the judge wasn't the one who said, yeah, go ahead, create a tent city with all the complete mayhem and violence that's going on here.
It seemed to me like, because it occurred, and it was sort of this nebulous idea of jurisdiction was floating around, actually how they were going to cope with it. And it seemed like they were all sort of off their script. that they weren't used to something happening that they actually had to respond to, and the public relations people really didn't know what to advise them to do. It seemed that they just seemed to be at a loss. And also, you have to admit that homelessness is a very, very serious situation in this city and across Canada. And somehow I think they were raising this, showing what what it really looked like, what homelessness really, what the impact really was, because of the concentration of so many people in one spot. And there was sort of embarrassment that was going on with them, that they really didn't know what quite to do.
Well, yeah, I can see that someone might not know what quite to do,
Yeah.
but the fact is that when you deliberately create this, and it's not like they say, well, let's try it out. It'll be like a picnic. You know, people just have a good time. When they were warned this is going to lead to violence, I mean, the drug production and sales that were going on in there, the gangs that were in there, the judge accepted finally the evidence and said that it was too great. But we got to remember some of the reasons for homelessness actually are directly related to how this provincial government has been dealing with it. They allow for rent increases of 2% over the rate of inflation every single year, and that's compounded.
Yeah.
And so when you look over the last, let's say 13, 14, 15 years, the increase in the price of rent, or sorry, the rent that it costs for people is astronomical compared to what we see in the way of jobs being created, which are mostly part-time jobs in BC, and also anyone getting those kind of raises. No one gets those raises unless you're, let's say, a contributor to Christy Clark's $50,000 stipend or something. You know, you're not getting those kind of raises. And so you fall on your luck for 1 or 2 months. You know, you get an injury or something, you're out of the market and you can't get back in. Yeah. And so it's right within their jurisdiction that they could have been helping out all along, and they didn't. They contributed to the
what
homelessness.
is the concerns now? There's nobody longer anybody there. They're going to do something to clean up the site. And what about this Mount Edwards and the Johnson Street locations? This is shelters that are now purchased by the province and supposed to house some people. Right. Are you saying that those areas also are starting to be an area where you're seeing a higher crime rate or a higher
without knowing all the statistics? The fact is, yes, what happens is when you have people who are the most difficult to house with all kinds of problems, and then your view is, once they're off our property, it's not our problem. That's outrageous. Yeah. They need to take responsibility. You see, the province was desperate because the judge rejected them. So they did not care where it went. It's just, oh, we've got this abandoned or this place for sale. It can hold 138 people. Let's buy it. Doesn't matter that it's within a few feet of the conservatory with 4,000 students to go there. Yeah. Mount Edwards, doesn't matter that there's a daycare and elementary school right across the street. The CEO of Kool-Aid admitted that to parents' meetings, where she said, no, I did not care where it was. I just wanted those houses. I just wanted those facilities for people to be in. And so we're saying, if housing first is this great idea, fine, okay. But you've got to actually put it in an area that's not in a residential area, that is not across the street from school and other family facilities, and that's not going to create this bubble zone. So in other words, you have to give a lot more care than you're giving, and the province has an interest in doing that.
Who provides the support for people like with mental health issues, addiction issues?
Well, it's the providers. You've got the likes of Our Place that deals with, that has a couple of facilities. Yeah. You've got Kool-Aid Society, and from Vancouver, you've got the the Portland Hotel Society, who's got the Johnson Street facility. But it is very limited. Basically, they just offer housing. And I went to one of the evening meetings for the community, and they said, folks, this is housing. That's it. Now, I appreciate that when you give someone housing, it helps out. We want that. But you don't do it in these numbers, and you don't do it in those locations, because it causes all kinds of problems. So get housing, but you got to pay for it. You got to spend more money, smaller groups of people, maybe more mixed, mixed use, that kind of stuff. But certainly in these areas, you couldn't pick areas that are more around families and kids. And when they've got opioids and other things in which people are at risk of even touching them, what is Christy Clark thinking? What is Rich Coleman thinking, putting it in these areas where you're endangering kids? Like, it just makes no sense.
It seems like they're not thinking very much at all. So look, Stephen, it's wonderful. The 10 or 12 minutes go by pretty quickly. Now, we'd love to have you back in a few months to see what's occurred. As we're seeing, are they learning the lessons here? Are they actually starting to supply these needed support groups, and is the city going to really step up and try to make something happen, or are they just going to continue on with lip service? But thank you very much for coming to see us today, and we're welcome to have you back in the future.
My pleasure.
So that's our first segment of Citizens Forum. Stay tuned. We're going to be having the Walt and Jack Show. Welcome back to Citizens Forum. This is the Walt and Jack Show, and we're going to be talking about a number of issues that are happening throughout the world. And welcome to the show, Jack.
Thank you,
And
Walt.
let's start out with CBC today
Right.
announcing that Trudeau is over in Europe, and they've agreed on a free trade deal over in Europe, the CETA deal. So what do you think's happening there? And I think that deal is in the best interest of Canadians.
Well, I just want to read this. I got this from cbc.ca, and it was a big headline. And it's talking about the European approval. The European Parliament has approved something. I'm not sure exactly what. But basically, it's moving ahead with CETA. And the headline on CBC says, "A deal for the people." A deal for the people. That's the CBC. And I just want to say that this exemplifies two of the most important things that's wrong with our country. First, what right does Trudeau have to go over there and push CETA when we Canadian people have absolutely no idea what's in it? And we have no idea what's in it because neither the government nor television, nor radio, nor newspapers ever tells us what's in it. They just keep telling us how great it is, just like NAFTA. Well, listen, if it's great, I'm all for it. But we don't know what's in it. Even, I'm interested, I've looked, you hear a few details, but who knows? So how dare he do that? And then how dare the CBC tell us it's a deal for the people? It's a disgrace. But the entire media is the same. They keep pushing this idea that the free trade deals are good. Well, the free trade deals are good. They're great for corporate Canada. Corporate Canada writes the agreements, the corporate politicians sign them, and then the corporate media tells us it's all wonderful, and the country is, as your previous guest was talking about, look what's happening on the street. And let's just move on to that.
There's just chaos, and the thing is, to me, is that what is the deal? I mean, we're all countries. We have laws. We're supposed to have environmental protection laws and workers, protection laws, and all that to control the development within our country, which is a legitimate activity of our government. So it seems to me, I can't understand why we even need the agreements. What's going to happen that will work better? And it always seems to me that it boils down to the idea that corporations just, they have more rights all the time, and the citizens' rights are always diminishing. And I think that's what's hidden in the language in those agreements.
That's exactly 100% what it is. And that's the problem. That is what it is, and yet our Prime Minister, without our approval, because we don't even know what's going on, he goes over and he'd love to sign this deal. Europe is having concerns. And we don't know what's in it. And the media keeps telling us it's great. How can you have a democratic country when the politicians have no relationship to the people anymore? And the media is owned by the corporations who also own the politicians.
How many things has Trudeau sold us out on already in this first year in office? Now, he went down to Europe, or down to Washington, and met with our good friend Donald Trump. And I don't know for sure why he was there.
Well, you have to visit the president.
You just go and say hello, I suppose. And the media trumped that up as being, or trumped it up. They played it up as being, sort of a successful meeting of the President of the United States. But what happened? Did they actually make a decision on something, or?
Well, one thing that I'm concerned about that's moving forward is 10 or 15, maybe 15 years ago, it was called the SPP, the Security and Prosperity Partnership. And that was a plan to put one common border around Canada, the United States, and Mexico.
Yeah.
And basically eliminate the borders between them. And that plan has been moving ahead slowly ever since. Now, I'm concerned that you keep hearing the word integration coming out of Trudeau. And whoever that Cynthia Freeland, I don't know what
Yeah.
she's the minister of, but I mean, she seems to work directly for the corporate plan. She can't get enough free trade deals,
Yeah.
which is fine. That's good for her. But what's that got to do with the government of Canada? So I think we had better keep a very close watch on what's happening with our border with the United States. And because the plan is to put one border around the two countries, I don't think that's what we want. And then it'll be corporate control of both countries together. This has nothing to do with the American people. It has nothing to do with the Canadian people. It's just the corporate plan. One thing that was mentioned is now at a lot of our airports, and more with other things as well, when you enter, let's say you fly in from maybe Europe or Asia, you don't necessarily enter Canada. You also get pre-cleared for the United States. So now you're entering North America. And now they're talking about border guards from the US with powers, police powers in Canada to arrest and detain people on Canadian soil. You know, just step by step, something may be happening or maybe not. It's hard to get information, but we should keep an eye on that.
You know, why are we attaching ourselves so intricately to the United States right now when their society is melting down by any measurements? I mean, the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer.
Sounds like Canada.
And the wars are going on for no reason whatsoever other than to create wars and to create destabilization, not only overseas but within their own society.
So why is it happening? Because that is the corporate plan.
Yeah.
That's their plan. They don't want to deal with border. They want control of both countries. They don't want to have to bring things across borders. They don't want governments to have to deal with. They want control, and they're getting it. They're talking about regulatory control and legislative control as well. That's what's changing. They want to get one set of regulations for all of North America, right?
Yeah.
Then they don't have to deal with it. Now, we don't even know about it. That's the problem.
Well, you know, the thing is that if you look at how things are going, and you know, Trudeau was supposed to have been our savior basically when he was going to get elected, that he was going to make a lot of great things happen, including proportional representation, which you're going to talk about later in the show. What do you think's going to happen? Like, United States, nobody's trusting Donald Trump out for anything. But you know what I was so curious about this was when Obama was in, and everybody loved Barack Obama. A lot of nasty things were still going on, and he didn't seem to be able to get anything done. That the Congress was always holding him up, or the Republicans were holding him up, and he was saying he had no power. Now Trump is in power, and they're blaming him for all these policies and stuff, but he has to have the support of the Republican Party, apparently, or that nothing would happen. And it seems so strange that they're just blaming everything on Donald Trump while the Republicans sit back and sort of...
Yeah, what bothers me the most is the complete division that's been created over a very, very, very long time in the United States. And it's dangerous when, and I think that again is deliberate. It's been, the people have been deliberately, divide and conquer is as old as the hills, and we're seeing it in front of our eyes. I'd like to talk about something else, which, you know, just the issue that Stephen Hammond brought up about homelessness and et cetera. I just want to say the way I see it. The way I see it is this. Over a period of many, many years, homelessness has been deliberately created in our city, and it's been, not in our city, in our country, it's everywhere. And it's part of a larger plan, which is a deliberately created shortage of housing. So because we don't have enough housing in most of our major cities and a lot of our towns, everybody has to pay more and more and more for housing. That's created huge profits for the companies that are building the housing, and no doubt the banks and the big land companies as well, because the value of their assets keeps going up. but it's all dependent on a shortage of housing. They've deliberately created a shortage of housing. They've created the homelessness and they've created the high house prices. Maybe I'm wrong, but that seems to be on the ground what's happening.
Yeah.
And I just walked from Hillside and Government down towards downtown. So when you're driving or walking along Government or along Douglas, and you're driving from downtown towards Hillside or back, just take a look to your left and right. And what you'll see is this huge area of light industrial property, 1-story, 2-story, some of it even derelict, a lot of parking lots, car dealerships. We have a housing crisis, and yet all of that land is not being made available for housing. And there are larger areas, I mean, if you go west of Government, I mean, my goodness. It's deliberate, folks. Or maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I see. And these are the kinds of people who run our country.
Well, you know, economic forces are such that there's a whole bunch of reasons why something doesn't get, some areas don't get developed. There's developers have to make money or want to make money, and it's just the way the system's going right now. It makes them the most money. Who can blame them for wanting to continue on that way? But of course, we do rely on our local politicians and to create...
And the provincial and federal government to build the housing that's needed for the people who live here. They've completely abdicated that, and they never get blamed. I mean, the city always gets blamed because they're not doing the job. And the neighborhoods, some of the neighborhoods are just getting killed. And the homeless people, they pay the heaviest price of all. Why are they homeless in this rich land? It's all completely insane, and it's being done to us. And if we don't stop them, look where we're going.
See, and Mazen mentioned just a few moments ago that the problem is that we tend to blame, say these people are in the tent city, and we tend to blame them for being criminals and for all these things. And those who are very concerned about their neighborhoods being put upside down with these sort of activities might be seen as like not in my backyard sort of folks. Whereas I don't think very many, maybe there might be a few people pointing fingers and blaming them for being criminals and such. But I think most people are saying, no, these people are victims of an economic system. And
we just need solutions. They won't let us solve the problem. The problem goes on and on and on, and our leadership deliberately will not solve it because they caused it.
Yeah.
And when they bring the housing bubble down, that will be a hit for our nation like we have not seen for a long time.
Yeah. If you think a political party, especially running in the next election, would make this a top priority issue, we're not really hearing that with the NDP right now. They seem to give the issue some lip service, but you don't see anything you can really sink your teeth into. So now, what do you want to talk about? The last thing here is...
okay.
Sure, tell us what you got.
This happened a day or so ago. This was I'll just hold it up, and if we can get that on the camera. It's a rally for Tuesday, February the 14th, which was yesterday, and it's about Save the Peace River, First Nations, LNG, green jobs, ancient forests. I mean, all these wonderful things.
Yeah.
Sponsored by Greenpeace, the Sierra Club, the Council of Canadians, the Wilderness Committee, Dogwood Institute, and several others. So I'm just thinking, you know, I support all of this. I support the issues. I have nothing against the groups. But the strategy isn't working. I think we've got to start to change our strategy. And the strategy I would suggest is to do what the corporations did. You've got to build a media so you can get your message out. And these groups can do it. I mean, these are big groups with some resources. It wouldn't hurt them to at least consider that and talk about it and think maybe a new direction. And plus talk about the fact that our politicians are completely undemocratic because the people don't want these things.
Yeah. So on that note, Jack, we're going to wrap it up for today, and you know, hopefully things can get better. I think with the Trudeau situation, you know, people are really, really starting to realize that politicians can just simply lie, and after the election, they just simply don't implement the policies they were planning on, and they're counting on getting away with it.
And they always do. They always do.
So people have to have a little longer memories, and when 3 years come around, we're going to be voting again, and hopefully
God help us.
we can hold their
Maybe.
feet to the fire. Anyway, thanks for watching, and that completes this segment of Citizens Forum.
Welcome back. Walt and I are sharing the hosting duties this week. So my guest in this segment is David Murner. David is with Fair Vote Canada, and we're going to be talking about what just happened, which was Justin Trudeau told us that a change to our voting system is now off the table. So you ran as a Liberal as a federal Liberal last election. So from your point of view, what's happening?
Well, it is a very disappointing decision for somebody who's worked for proportional representation for a long, long time, and as you say, part of Fair Vote Canada. And I was actually at the announcement in Ottawa in June of 2015 when we said we would campaign for electoral reform and we would make every vote count. And I knocked on a lot of doors talking about that, the need for electoral reform. So it is very disappointing. The explanation is that there are a lot of other things on the agenda. You know, our relationship with the United States is key, and we need to focus on other matters.
Is that what they're saying?
But that's one of the explanations, but I still believe that electoral reform is a critical priority. And so the questions for Liberals like me and for Fair Vote Canada is, what do we do now? Where do we go? How do we keep this idea moving? Do we give up and protest? And there have been a lot of protests. Last weekend, there were protests from coast to coast. But what do we do beyond protests? What can we do that's practical, that will move electoral reform forward, including inside the Liberal Party? Because there are a lot of Liberals, Liberal members, Liberal MPs, who believe in electoral reform in a very deep way. I'm one of them. And so now the question is, what do we do? And it's a tough question.
Yeah, well, to me, in my opinion, the reason we can't get electoral reform is because proportional voting is more democratic. It actually gives people more power. We see that in most of the European countries where for the last 20 or 30 years, they've been the leaders in, social programs, good health care, taking care of their citizens, and working conditions, environmental standards, so much. And they have proportional representation, and that's a big factor. So in my opinion, Canada is not run by the Liberal Party. Trudeau is really little more than a puppet. And it's got nothing to do with him. Our prime ministers and our premiers are little more than puppets. Corporate Canada runs the country, and right now they have complete control. And they do not want a voting system that is going to give us a bit more power, because proportional voting really does change the playing field. And to me, that's the problem. And somebody said, know your enemy, and I think we've got to know our enemy. If we focus on what Justin Trudeau did, I think we're missing the boat. He's just a puppet, I think. Or, maybe I'm completely wrong, but...
I think that's one viewpoint. But if you look at our politicians who served on the special House of Commons committee on electoral reform, I think you were there at the Minister Monsef's consultations.
Yeah, there was something
remember?
here in Victoria.
Here in Victoria. Yeah. And you look at what they concluded as a group, and basically 4 of the 5 parties in the House of Commons concluded that proportional representation was the way to go. And this is just the latest in a long series of commissions and parliamentary committee reports and constituent assemblies that have said proportional representation is the way to go. I think there's been 13 since 1921. And so I think with these politicians and other experts lining up behind proportional representation, there is hope that change is going to come. And I'm even hopeful that it could come before 2019. I think that the next thing to do is look at a private member's bill and appeal to federal Liberals, Greens, NDP. The Bloc is probably on board as well. I don't think the Conservatives will ever come on board, but
some are there.
Some are there. Scott Reid is one, right? So build a coalition that'll say we want electoral reform before 2019. We're going to work together on making it happen. And I'm still hopeful that even before 2019 we can bring in legislation, ideally proportional representation, maybe combined with a preferential ballot, right, where instead of marking an X, we mark a preference on the ballot, and make it happen. And so I'm not giving up. I still think there's hope.
So you think we can still, in time for the 2019 election, have the 2019 election carried out in a different, with a different voting system?
It would have to happen very quickly.
Very
The
quickly,
chief
yeah.
electoral officer has said, you know, if legislation is brought in May, June, July time period, Elections Canada could make the 2019
Right,
election happen. So it would have to happen quite quickly, and that's the challenge, is getting it onto the House of Commons agenda and then through the parliamentary process in that time.
I'd say it's impossible with the opposition of the Prime Minister, because it's just not possible. I would say.
don't think it's just the Prime Minister, because it is tough for federal Liberals generally. We swept Atlantic Canada. We won 100% of the seats there. And the way proportional representation works, if you get 39% of the votes, you only get 39% of the seats. So it's hard all around. I don't think it's just the Prime Minister. There are a lot of backbench Liberals who would end up losing their seats.
Yeah, well, that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
And of course they don't want that, but it's not about them. It's supposed to be about us, about the people of Canada.
Yeah.
And I just want to comment on the role the media has played. From the very beginning, this issue has been downplayed. If you compare the coverage given to proportional representation compared to the coverage given, let's say, the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Mike Duffy trial,
That's right.
you know, you see the massive difference. And then the media started saying, oh, it's undemocratic, we've got to have a referendum. Can you imagine the media of all people pretending to care about democracy? And the only reason they wanted a referendum was because, and I support referendums, but you have a referendum, people have to know what they're voting on. And the media and the politicians have made sure that we have no idea of what a system actually is and what the benefits are and what the problems are with our current system. All of those things are important, and you know, there's pluses and minuses all around. But I think if most people had things laid out in front of them, we would see that proportional voting is simply better for us. And that's why it's all kept secret. We know nothing.
Well, I think you're right about the media. If you look at the media a year ago when we were starting this latest campaign around electoral reform, the level of, frankly, ignorance and also just general disinformation on what proportional representation means, what the options are, is quite stunning. There are one or two people. Andrew Coyne is a good example of somebody who really gets the issue. Chantal Hébert learned a lot over the last year. There are a few sort of top-level journalists who actually get this issue. And one of the good things about the campaign over the past year is there's been a huge education process for the media. And I think they were starting to look at electoral reform as a file that had been badly handled by the government, and also a file where there was a potential for making change, and they were starting to get interested in it in December, January, and so on. And so there's been some progress in terms of education. People are starting to understand in the media how this works and why it's such a good thing for Canadians, but we still have a long way to go. And I think that one of the things we need to do in Fair Vote Canada, and for people who are committed to electoral reform, is continue with the pressure to educate mainstream media on this issue. Because, as you say, there's been a lot of relatively weak reporting on it.
Well, I would say, I'll go back to what I said earlier, which is that corporate Canada runs this country and they don't want any more democracy, which proportional voting, I think, would give us. And corporate Canada owns all the media, every television station, every radio station, every daily paper, you know, and much, much more in this country. So I think if you think you're going to educate the media, forget about it. They will not be educated, because the whole thing is this, from day one, we were never going to get PR. It is simply too important. That's what I think. I mean, you're coming at it from a more practical point of view.
Agree.
Let's do it.
It is fundamental. And I think that if we bring in PR, we'll see, like in countries like Norway and Sweden and Switzerland and so on, we'll see different public policy outcomes. Ironically, I think they will be more liberal, more middle of the road outcomes, because what will happen is our politicians will have to start collaborating and working together. And we won't have the extremes of a Stephen Harper, for example, because Stephen Harper will not have enough support in the House to sustain
And neither will
extreme
Justin
policy.
Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau won on 39% of the vote.
right.
That's exactly right. Same percentage as Stephen Harper. And Justin Trudeau in the future will have to figure out, how do I create a coalition if we were in proportional representation?
And if the public doesn't like the way the coalition is going, I mean, 10% of the votes gives you 10% of the seats. So right away, if the public's not happy, 10% vote, right now, 10% of the vote gives you nothing,
Yeah.
generally.
It's very unfair to the smaller parties like the Greens, who on their, I think they, on their current voting patterns, get one seat, but it takes them 600,000 votes across Canada to get that one seat. Very unfair. Liberals get in with 37,000. So our system is distorted. One seat for the Liberals, 37,000 voters. One seat for the Greens, 600,000. It's just not a fair system for the smaller parties. I think that the Prime Minister raised a legitimate concern, which was about extremist parties. You know, will extremist parties become part of the House of Commons more easily? But I think the data, if you look at the Netherlands or, again, Norway, Switzerland, Sweden, shows that these extremist parties might actually win some seats because they are smaller. That's how proportional
should.
representation works. But they don't have enough seats to form power.
Exactly.
And the other mainstream parties don't want to be anywhere near them. But right now, you look at the states, first past the post system, Trump gets in, 3 million votes less than Hillary Clinton, right? You look at the French elections coming up. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Marine Le Pen, another first past the post system, where you could end up with another very extreme leader. So it's going to be interesting to see whether what's happening around the world right now, in the States, in France and so on, affects people's thinking around the risks associated with first past the post.
Yeah, it's an important issue, and you know, it was there, and it's slipping away. But everybody should remember that it's our voting system. It's not Justin Trudeau's voting system. It's not corporate Canada's voting system. It's our voting system, and it's up to us to take our democracy back from the people who have stolen it from us. If we want proportional voting, we should have it. That period. Full stop. The media is against us, the corporations are against us, most of the politicians are against us, but it's not about them. It should be about the people of Canada.
And here's the next step. For people who want to take action and who want to make a contribution, there are a couple of things they can do. One is there's an online petition right now. If you go to the Parliament of Canada website, the e-petitions, there's a e-petition which has already got over 100,000 people to sign it, which is a new record, by the way. Yeah. And Nathan Cullen from the NDP is sponsoring that one. So that's one thing people can do. Another thing they can do is join Fair Vote Canada. We're organizing protests across the country. We're organizing lobbying to reach out to all the MPs, not just Liberal MPs, and say this is something that 63% of Canadians voted for parties that supported electoral reform. We want to see it happen. And it's something that is very popular in the polls. You know, the Ipsos poll came out with 70% of people supporting proportional representation. So I think a majority of Canadians want us to go in this direction. And over time, I think the politicians will have to listen to that.
David, we're out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.
Welcome back to Citizens Forum. This is our final segment. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the Shaw staff and the volunteers that make this show happen every week. None of this could happen without their dedication and support. We've been talking a lot about democracy in this show. It's a good theme that we have on the go. And we decided to just do a little review about democracy and sort of attitudes we should have. So Jack is back here to talk about this issue. Now, we go to the polls whenever we can go, and everybody gets to have a chance to vote. And isn't that not a democracy, Jack? I mean, are we being too complacent about that?
Well, to me, democracy means something more like government of the people. I think most people would go along with that. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. The actual meaning of the word is from the Greek, demos, the people, and kratia, to rule. So democracy actually means the people rule. So is that what we have in Canada? Do we have government of the people? And I would say, no, we absolutely don't. I mean, just looking at what has happened in this country and our provinces and our cities over the last 20 or 30 years, it is not government of the people, it's government controlling the people, and I think working for the corporation. So we actually have government of the corporation. I would love to see more government of the people. I have a faith in the people of Canada and the people of any country, just the citizenry, just people,
Yeah.
to do a lot better job for ourselves
Yeah.
if we had some power.
So, what do you think are the key components of a democracy? You said, okay, we had these items all lined up, and we have these things, then we have a chance to have a democracy.
Well, you've got to have an independent media, and you've got to have politicians and governments that work for the public.
So,
That's
so what do you see as, why is the media not independent? What's the major reason for that?
Well, the media isn't independent because it's all owned by half a dozen corporations, maybe 8 or 9. Every television station, every radio station, every newspaper, every much more than that in the country is owned by 8 or 9 major corporations. The biggest one is probably Bell, which owns the entire CTV network,
Yeah.
and they own CFAX Radio here in town, and they own another radio station as well.
Yeah.
They own about 100 radio stations across the country. They own specialty TV channels, and the same with Rogers, the same with Shaw. In Quebec, it's, I can't remember the name of the corporation in Quebec, but they own like everything in Quebec.
Yeah.
Videotron, I think it's called. So when you have that, when you have one small special interest group, the corporate Canada, which is hugely powerful,
Yeah.
but only represents really the 1% of the 1%.
Well, they
and
seem
own
to
all the
represent
media.
their advertisers to a certain degree, who are also corporations, I guess. So it all seems to come part and parcel, doesn't it?
And we have to ask, is democracy important?
Yeah.
And if we look at what's going on around us, your first guest today talked about the homelessness. Do we, as the Canadian people, want homelessness? Did we ever vote for homelessness? Did somebody come to us and say, do you want? And we all said, yeah, we want lots of it. No, it was just done to us, and it doesn't matter who we vote for. You can vote Conservative, you can vote Liberal, you can vote NDP. It won't matter. Nothing is going to change because the political parties too are unfortunately controlled from above. They're not controlled by the membership, they're not controlled by the public, they too are controlled by corporate Canada. So when you have that kind of a situation, there is no democracy possible, or very, very, very little. And the trade deal that Mr. Trudeau is so... GMOs, we wouldn't have GMOs in Canada, I don't think. I mean, if we want them, great. But if we don't, we shouldn't have them. We don't want them, but it doesn't matter. Healthcare, they've destroyed our healthcare system. Did anybody ever ask us, do you want us to destroy your healthcare system so we can privatize it and you have to wait months and years for treatment and suffer and die? No, but they did it to us anyway. Our governments are out of our control and the media the same. And that's, it's vitally important in our everyday life, and we don't even see the problem. And I don't blame people because, it's just not an issue.
It seemed to me like, when you last couple of 3 years, particularly when so many First Nations people in Canada are getting it together and really demanding to be part of this of the decision-making process. I don't know how far they're getting on that quest, but they're demanding it. And I think if everybody else just said the same thing and said, no, we want these things, you guys have to do it for us, and if not, you're going to get thrown out. But we just seem to have this kind of a situation where hardly anybody ever gets unelected. You see so many of the same faces showing up in the CRD and the municipal politics, provincially, career politicians that really don't have any other skills. If being a politician takes skill, I don't know, but they don't seem to be responsive to our needs. Now, what are the things we can do? What are some of the things you think we can do to make our electoral system more democratic?
Okay. Well, here's two that we should be thinking about right now. One is proportional voting. Proportional voting is more democratic. It gives the public more power, which is why we can't have it. So we should, if you're interested really in all the issues, environmental issues, social issues, economic issues, we've got, so PR will help, and it's very important. We should all be fighting for it. And the second thing is we've got to reduce the power of the party leaders. It's one of the biggest problems in our political system is that the party leader has life and death control over every one of the MLAs and MPs we elect. The party leader can end their political career basically tomorrow if you dare to stand against him. And if the party leader is controlled by the corporation, then you can see how simple it is to completely control our entire political system.
You know, and even in aspiring candidates in the last election, last federal election, the NDP, was anybody who was saying anything at all with any understanding of the politics in the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean, people that may have had concerns about the level of democracy in Israel, for instance, the NDP just basically says, no, we're not going to have that. If we don't have a full-on, complete, endorsement of the government of Israel as it stands, we're not going to allow you to be a candidate.
For the party. Yeah, exactly. That's the way it works. And it's because the party leader has all the power. That's something that we should be focusing on. You cannot have a democracy when your political system is filled with little dictators.
Yeah.
It simply does not work. So we've got to free up our politicians, and there are ways to do it. We don't know anything about it because it's never mentioned, which is, of course, the heart of the problem. Yeah. We're dealing always with the symptoms, Site C, GMOs, our healthcare system, homelessness. But the heart of the matter is we need a media that works for us and just tells us what's going on, and we need government of the people.
Yeah. It seems to me, when it gets right down to it too, is that we can talk about issues till we're blue in the face, what we think are the important things we should be considering as citizens. But the average citizen is so busy trying to survive, trying to get up every morning and get to work and make some money to pay the rent and pay the mortgage and raise the kids. And it seems that they're getting less engaged in the, let's say, the nuances of politics. They really don't know. Somebody thought Christy Clark was a good idea. Their neighbor thinks she's creating democratic or creating economic activity. That seems to be a good enough reason, and away they go and they elect her, and they forget about all the awful things that the Liberal Party has done over the last several years.
Well, we don't even know about them, like the debt. My understanding is they've added, I believe, $50 billion in long-term debt to BC Hydro for those run-of-river contracts.
Yeah.
Now, it's never mentioned. The NDP won't even mention it. I mean, so what's going on? It's like that can't be talked about. What kind of political system is that?
Yeah, and particularly the run-of-river issues, because that's got to go on into the future. That's a debt our children and our grandchildren are going to be paying off. Of course, that ties into the Site C dam development, which they're going to build a dam that nobody needs power for.
It's too bad there is absolutely, as far as I can tell, no leadership in our country that's focusing on just the issue of democracy.
Yeah.
Because I think that's really where the answer is. If we can get more democracy, we'll win all the issues. We'll start to win all the issues.
Yeah.
If we had an independent media, we'd start to win all the issues. But nobody with some oomph or power, political clout or environmental group clout or union clout is pushing in that direction. So we keep losing. Yeah,
if we can keep working here on the show, I mean, it's our preoccupation is to try to figure out ways to get the public more involved and have people on this show. And to me, that's we almost have to wake up out of our slumber in some ways, thinking that maybe I'm personally not involved, but it'll all seem to go along and we'll sort of bumble through these issues. People aren't really seeing that it's not a status quo situation. In fact, we're losing ground all the time as it stands right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, I honestly, I don't know what to say except for that. Proportional representation, a better voting system was there. It would have fundamentally changed this country. It still can fundamentally change this country. We can't allow them to take it away from us. we've got to see, we've got to see past the idea that this is Justin Trudeau doing this to us.
Yeah.
He's a puppet. You know, the powerful forces in this country are corporate. They will not let us have it because they don't want to share the power.
When we were looking into Trudeau and his chief advisors and looked at the NDP and the Conservatives, firstly, I was shocked that the NDP had so much embedded public relations people in their campaigns and running their party all the time. And that was really shocking for me. But then all the three major parties in Canada, the same people are in all those parties. And
that's something that's never talked about. I mean, what you said is exactly correct. In the last federal election, there's a big public relations firm called Hill and Knowlton. This is a firm where the corporations, when they're in real trouble, they call in Hill and Knowlton to do the dirty work for them, to pave everything over. Hill and Knowlton, a Hill and Knowlton employee was the, I believe, chief advisor to Tom Mulcair of the NDP, and another Hill and Knowlton employee was I believe, the co-chair of the Liberal Party of Canada, and who knows with the Conservative Party. But what's going on here, and that, I'm not saying that's even bad, but it should be out in the public eye. We should know who's controlling and manipulating our political parties at levels that most of the rest of us can't even imagine.
Yeah, it seems almost like the politics is a game. There's certain rules of the game that have to be learnt by the politicians. So we have the public relations people around them all the time to let them know how to phrase issues and to more or less stay in agreement on the general view of an issue. Maybe and debate certain parts of an issue like oil and gas development and stuff like that. But nobody's really saying, no, we have to keep the oil in the ground. The planet's in a dire straits. We have to change courses right away. We're not hearing that in the main parties.
Exactly.
Anyway, so thank you so much, Jack, for coming in and touching on those topics. And that completes this week's show. Thank you for watching.